Hey guys, tonight we dive into a quiet shadow cast over Greek myths, a shadow that rarely screams but lingers persistently behind every tale of marriage. You might think of these myths as grand adventures full of gods, heroes, and epic love stories. Yet if you listen closely, you'll hear something else, a persistent thread of regret, sorrow, and uneasy peace entwined with every union. Why is it that in so many of these stories, marriage never quite delivers the happiness it promises? Why do women, time and again, seem to bear a secret sadness beneath the glimmering surface of these divine or heroic matches? The paradox is subtle. These are tales of love and power, yet marriage often feels like a gilded cage, a heavy crown that's more burden than blessing. You probably won't survive this quiet realization without rethinking everything you thought you knew about love in myth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not share where you're watching from and what time it is? It's always fascinating to know who's joining this whispered journey. You trudge along the worn path of ancient stories, stepping carefully over the echoes of brides and wives whose lives unfold not as fairy tale endings, but as complex, often painful tapestries. Greek mythology, after all, didn't invent marriage as a romance, but as a battleground of power, expectation, and fate. In the world of gods and mortals, marriage was less about two people and more about alliances, inheritances, and the shifting balance of forces beyond individual control. The idea that marriage should bring comfort or fulfillment is almost alien to these myths instead. It's a contract often sealed with sacrifices that only reveal themselves in hindsight. Take, for example, the very concept of marriage in ancient Greek society, which scholars still argue over. Some say marriage was primarily a social arrangement to secure lineage and property, with little concern for affection or personal happiness. Others suggest that love and desire occasionally seep through the rigid roles, creating moments of tenderness that stand out starkly against the backdrop of duty. Either way, these tensions seep into the stories, painting women's marriages as complicated, fraught, and frequently tragic. One quirky tidbit not often mentioned is how Greek brides sometimes carried a protective charm or amulet into their marriage, believed to ward off evil spirits or jealous gods. It's almost as if even they sensed the dark possibilities lurking beneath their new lives. Imagine clutching such a charm, feeling its cold smoothness against your palm, knowing it might be your only shield against the invisible forces waiting to unravel your world. And it's not just mortal marriages that reveal this sadness. The gods themselves model this complicated dance. Gods and goddesses wed and betray, love and punish, often blurring the lines between blessing and curse. Marriage in myth becomes a metaphor for power struggles and emotional turmoil, revealing that even divine unions carry their own shadows. It's as if these stories whisper a warning. Marriage might look glorious from the outside, but inside, it can twist the heart into knots. Now, you probably notice how this quiet sadness repeats, almost like a refrain in a mournful song. Each story you'll hear tonight adds a verse to that melody: Hera's bitterness, Medea's fury, Helen's burden, and Penelope's loneliness. They are not simply women caught in bad marriages. They are symbols of the deeper, universal conflicts that marriage can unleash. And while their names echo through history, their regrets whisper to you, reminding you that love's promises have long carried shadows. Historians still argue whether these myths merely reflect the realities of ancient Greek marriage or serve as cautionary tales shaped by male storytellers to warn women, or perhaps men, about the dangers and complexities of these bonds. Some suggest these stories functioned as social control, emphasizing women's supposed vulnerability and the chaos that could ensue if they stepped outside accepted roles. Others see them as early explorations of human emotion and tragedy, uncomfortably honest about the costs of union. Either way, you can't unsee the pattern once it emerges. It's a soft paradox, a shadow that waits patiently in the background, quietly unsettling the familiar tales. The stories don't shout these truths, they hide them, letting the regret seep in slowly, like twilight swallowing daylight. So, as you settle deeper into the soft hum of your surroundings, perhaps a fan whispering nearby, or the gentle creak of a night breeze, let this quiet observation fold around you. You're about to walk alongside women who navigated love and marriage not as simple tales of joy, but as journeys marked by resilience, loss, and unspoken longing. Remember that strange little charm carried by brides long ago. Let it be a symbol for what you're about to uncover, a subtle, hidden sadness behind the stories you thought you knew. These myths might be old, but the emotions they hold are alive, pulsing quietly beneath the surface. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Hera, the queen of Olympus and goddess of marriage, wears her bitter crown with a heavy grace that few truly understand. You might imagine her as the majestic wife of Zeus, draped in regal robes, commanding respect and reverence. But beneath that veneer lies a simmering resentment, a cold fire fueled by endless betrayal and the impossible demands placed upon her. She's not merely a symbol of wedded bliss. She is the embodiment of marriage's darker shadows. As the protector of marriage, you'd expect her to be a figure of comfort and celebration, yet her stories paint her as a relentless avenger, punishing the women her husband pursues and often tormenting even her own offspring. In every myth, Hera's anger feels less like spite and more like a sorrowful burden she must bear. Her rage is a quiet lament for the unions she can't protect or make whole. Imagine the weight of being the goddess whose very essence is tied to marriage, yet who watches it crumble time and again. Hera's jealousy and wrath spring not just from petty vindictiveness, but from a profound grief. She is both enforcer and victim of a system that traps women and men alike in roles they cannot escape. Her marriage to Zeus is legendary for its turbulence. His countless affairs and illegitimate children are a constant betrayal. Yet, Hera's response is never straightforward forgiveness. Instead, her punishment often falls hardest on the women caught in Zeus's web, leaving you to wonder whether her anger is justice, desperation, or a manifestation of her own heartbreak. Her story whispers a paradox. The goddess of marriage herself is trapped in a marriage rife with sorrow and mistrust. Historians still argue whether Hera's characterization is a reflection of ancient Greek women's real experiences or a mythological exaggeration designed to warn about the chaos jealousy can sow. Was Hera a projection of societal fears about unfaithfulness and the fragility of marital bonds, or did her stories capture something deeper about women's struggles within patriarchal constraints? You might imagine Greek women hearing these tales and finding in Hera a mirror of their own conflicted feelings toward marriage, an institution promising protection but often delivering pain. It's a narrative thread that stretches beyond myth, touching the human heart across centuries. A quirky detail you might not expect is how Hera was sometimes worshipped with a touch of dark humor. At certain festivals, women would jokingly complain about their husbands in Hera's name, offering sacrifices that were less about reverence and more about shared frustration. This humanizes her, revealing that ancient women could find both solace and a subtle form of rebellion through the goddess. Imagine a circle of women, gathered quietly in the shade of olive trees, exchanging whispered complaints to Hera, as if she were a confidant who understood the bitter irony of their marriages. It's almost as if Hera's fury was a collective catharsis for all those caught in unhappy unions. But Hera's story isn't just about punishment or jealousy. It's about the impossible role women were expected to play. She is the eternal wife, the guardian of family and fidelity, yet constantly undermined by her husband's unfaithfulness and the gods' capriciousness. You might feel the quiet exhaustion beneath her thunderbolts, the fatigue of defending an ideal she can never fully realize. Her narrative challenges the idea that marriage is a sanctuary, revealing instead a battlefield where trust is scarce and pain is often inevitable. Remember the subtle symbolism of Hera's peacock, the dazzling feathers hiding 1,000 eyes. These eyes watch ceaselessly, a metaphor for vigilance and perhaps paranoia. For Hera, marriage demands constant watchfulness, a reminder that betrayal can strike at any moment. That image lingers long after the story's end, a quiet warning about the costs of guarding love in a world ruled by gods and fate. Historians also debate whether Hera's wrath was originally intended as a moral lesson or a reflection of real marital dynamics in ancient Greece. Was she a cautionary tale about the dangers of jealousy and vengeance, or an expression of women's suppressed voices against infidelity and injustice? The ambiguity of her character invites you to see her as more than a mythological figure. She's a symbol of the complex emotions marriage evokes: love entwined with pain, devotion shadowed by doubt. If you pause for a moment, you might hear the faint echo of Hera's voice through the ages, a voice that neither screams nor wails, but holds a steady, weary tone. It's the voice of a woman who understands all too well the bitter costs of marriage, who rules not with gentle kindness, but with fierce determination born from suffering. You can almost feel her gaze following you, a reminder that even those who seem to hold power in love are often its prisoners. That unresolved tension, the interplay between Hera's divine status and her human-like grief, is what makes her story linger in your mind. She personifies the truth that marriage, even when sanctified by gods, carries the weight of broken promises and silent regrets. You might sense the irony that the goddess responsible for protecting marriages is herself, enveloped in an endless cycle of hurt and retaliation. It's a paradox as old as the myths themselves. So, as you imagine Hera watching from her throne, lightning crackling in the distance, remember that her bitterness is not just fury, but a lament for the love she cannot reclaim. Her story, wrapped in layers of divine drama and human emotion, sets the tone for many of the women you'll meet in these tales. Women who inherit not only crowns, but curses, whose marriages are both blessing and burden. In the hush that follows her thunder, you might feel a strange kinship with Hera. She's a goddess and a woman, eternal yet vulnerable, fierce yet mourning. Her story beckons you to look beyond the spectacle of mythology and into the subtle, enduring truths about love's complexities. She invites you to consider that sometimes the greatest power lies not in celebration, but in endurance. So keep this image close, Hera, the queen whose crown weighs heavy with grief, whose eyes watch endlessly, and whose wrath is a testament to love's painful demands. This is the shadow behind the goddess of marriage, one that colors every story you'll hear tonight. A reminder that the glittering myth of marriage often conceals a deep, bitter sorrow. Medea's story is a storm of love, betrayal, and fury that crashes relentlessly against the fragile shores of marriage. You probably know her as the sorceress who exacted horrific revenge on Jason, but beyond the headlines of vengeance lies a profound narrative about what marriage can demand from women when it becomes a cage rather than a home. Her tale is not just a mythic horror story, it's a whispered lament about trust broken and sacrifices never repaid. Imagine the fire in her heart, once bright with love and hope, smothered slowly by betrayal and desertion, transforming into a blaze of wrath that consumes everything she holds dear. Marriage, in Medea's world, is not a haven, but a crucible where love is tested by cruelty and loyalty is shattered by ambition. You step into Medea's shoes, a foreign princess who gave up everything: family, homeland, magic, to follow Jason across the seas. She trusted him, bound her fate to his, and bore the weight of his ambitions as her own. The marriage they forged was no equal partnership but a precarious balance, constantly threatened by Jason's desire for power and social acceptance. When Jason cast her aside for another woman to secure his future, Medea's world crumbled, and her heartbreak erupted into a vengeance so brutal that it still shocks listeners today. But beneath the horror is a raw human truth. When the promises of marriage are broken, the pain is unbearable, and the cost can be devastating. A historical fact tucked in here in ancient Greece: women often had little legal or social standing in marriage, making Medea's plight more than just myth. She represents the vulnerable position of many women forced to rely entirely on their husbands, whose decisions could cast them into exile or despair. Scholars debate whether Medea's extreme actions symbolize the suppressed rage of women denied agency or serve as a warning against defying social order. Either way, her story opens a window into the harsh realities behind marriage's romantic veil. One quirky fringe tidbit you might enjoy is that Medea was reputedly an expert in herbal magic and potions, sometimes credited with inventing medicines and poisons alike. Imagine her kitchen filled with strange plants and bubbling brews, the scent of herbs mingling with the cold tension of betrayal. It's as if her magic, once a source of wonder and power, became a tool for reclaiming control in a world where her voice was silenced. Medea's fury is also a reflection of the mythic world's view on women's power, seen as dangerous, volatile, and often linked to chaos. Her story complicates the idea of marriage as a safe, ordered institution, showing instead how it can unleash the darkest parts of human emotion when trust is destroyed. Her rage is a cry that resonates through the ages, warning that betrayal in marriage is not just personal, but catastrophic. You might notice how Medea's story contrasts with the typical romantic tales you're used to. There's no soft reconciliation here, no forgiving spouse or happy ending. Instead, there's raw, unfiltered grief and an eruption of pain that leaves no room for compromise. It's a narrative that dares to reveal the unbearable truth. Marriage can be the site of deepest wounds, where love's destruction is also its defining moment. This tale also explores the theme of exile, both physical and emotional. After her revenge, Medea is cast out, a woman stripped of home, family, and status. You can almost feel the cold loneliness enveloping her as she walks away from the ruins of her marriage, a figure both powerful and tragic, marked forever by what was lost. It's a reminder that in these myths, marriage is not just a relationship, but a social contract that can seal a woman's fate. Historians and mythologists still argue about the meaning behind Medea's actions, whether she is villain or victim, monster or martyr. Some see her as an early feminist symbol of resistance, a woman who refuses to be erased or silenced. Others interpret her as a cautionary figure, embodying the dangers of unchecked passion and revenge. Either way, her story challenges you to confront uncomfortable questions about love, power, and justice in marriage. Imagine the quiet moments between the storms, the whispered promises broken in shadowed rooms, the slow unraveling of trust like threads pulled from a delicate tapestry. Medea's tale pulls you into that space, forcing you to feel the pain of being betrayed by the one you trusted most. It's not a story to soothe you to sleep, but to stir a deep awareness of what marriage can cost when it becomes a battlefield. Remember how earlier we spoke of Hera's bitterness, the goddess whose crown weighs heavy with grief. Medea's fury might be seen as a mortal echo of that divine sorrow, both women bound by love that turns to pain, both forced to endure the devastating consequences of broken vows. Their stories intertwine in the mythic tapestry, revealing marriage as a realm of sorrow as much as joy. There's a cruel irony in Medea's magic. The very powers that could heal and protect become instruments of destruction. It's a metaphor for how love, when twisted by betrayal, can burn everything in its path. You might feel the heat of that fire as you listen, a reminder that marriage's promises can be fragile, vulnerable to the harsh winds of fate and human failing. So as you drift deeper into this myth, let Medea's story linger in your mind, not as a simple tale of revenge, but as a haunting meditation on love's fragility and the devastating impact of betrayal. Her pain is a mirror reflecting the quiet regrets so many women in Greek myths carry, a testament to the complex, often dark, realities of marriage. And if you find yourself empathizing with Medea's loneliness, her rage, and her heartbreak, remember that these emotions are not just ancient relics, but echoes in your own world. Love and marriage remain as complicated, demanding, and sometimes painful as ever. You might smile wryly, knowing that Medea's story has survived millennia, not because it offers comfort, but because it speaks an essential, unvarnished truth. Marriage in these myths is not a simple happy ending, but a long, complicated journey marked by sacrifice, sorrow, and sometimes fury. So hold that thought gently, like the scent of herbs in a forgotten room, and let Medea's tale remind you that beneath the glittering veneer of myth lies a raw, enduring human story. Helen of Troy, often hailed as the most beautiful woman in all of Greek mythology, carries a burden far heavier than her legendary beauty might suggest. You step into the quiet turmoil behind her famed face, the kind of sorrow that doesn't make headlines, but seeps into the cracks of every whispered conversation. Helen's marriage was less a union of love and more a volatile spark that ignited one of history's greatest wars, the Trojan War. It's easy to see her as a prize, an object to be won and fought over, but beneath that lies a deeply human tragedy. Beauty, in her case, was as much a curse as a gift. You begin to realize that Helen's story is not about triumph or glory, but about the painful cost of being trapped in a marriage that she neither fully controlled nor desired. In the myths, her regret is subtle but unmistakable, casting a shadow that stretches far beyond the battlefield. Think of her life as a gilded cage, one built from her unparalleled beauty and the political machinations of men who sought to possess her. Helen was taken from Sparta by Paris, Prince of Troy, an act that launched a decade-long war, costing countless lives. But what was her experience in all this? Was she a willing participant, a victim, or a complex figure caught between choice and fate? The stories offer conflicting glimpses, some portraying her as complicit, others as sorrowful and trapped. This ambiguity reflects a larger scholarly debate about her role, whether she was a pawn in men's games or a woman struggling to assert her agency amid forces beyond her control. A fascinating fringe tidbit is that, in some versions of the myth, Helen never actually went to Troy but was whisked away to Egypt by the gods, while a phantom double caused the chaos. Imagine the confusion and identity crisis in that story. The idea that Helen herself might be both present and absent, a haunting symbol of illusion and reality. It's as if the myths themselves wrestle with how to depict a woman whose beauty defined her, yet obscured her true self. Helen's marriage to Menelaus before Paris stole her was supposed to be a royal alliance, a political union designed to secure peace and power. Yet the fragility of that alliance and the devastating consequences of its rupture underscore the precariousness of marriage as a social contract in ancient times. You might imagine Helen's heart torn between loyalty, fear, and the pressure of being a symbol rather than a person. Her story reveals how marriage, especially among the elite, often reduced women to mere possessions, valuable, yes, but powerless. Historians still argue over how much Helen's story reflects real attitudes toward women and marriage in ancient Greece. Was she an example of female agency, using her allure to influence events, or a tragic victim sacrificed on the altar of male honor and pride? This ongoing debate invites you to see Helen not just as a mythical figure, but as a lens through which the complexities of gender, power, and marriage are magnified. Remember the quiet, resentful grief threaded through Hera's and Medea's tales. Helen's story joins their chorus, revealing that marriage can be a source of sorrow, disguised by beauty and fame. Her regret, though often overshadowed by the spectacle of war, is a poignant reminder that the cost of being a woman in these myths was rarely measured in gold or glory, but in isolation and loss. Imagine Helen standing on the walls of Troy, the city burning around her, caught between two worlds, the one she left and the one that has become her prison. The weight of expectation presses down on her like the heavy folds of her royal cloak, suffocating and relentless. Her beauty, which once promised power and admiration, now feels like a chain binding her to a fate not of her making. There's also a curious element of how Helen was viewed by the other women in these myths. Some stories hint at jealousy and fear, as her beauty threatened their own positions, while others show compassion for her plight. This complexity adds another layer to her narrative, illustrating how marriage could alienate women from one another, isolating them in their shared regrets and rivalries. You might chuckle softly at the irony that the face that launched 1,000 ships also launched 1,000 whispered curses. Helen's beauty, instead of bringing her happiness, became a symbol of destruction and regret. It's a paradox that resonates deeply, reminding you that appearances can be deceiving and that the brightest lights often cast the darkest shadows. Her story also touches on the theme of choice. How much control did Helen have over her fate? Was she a willing participant in Paris's abduction, or a victim swept along by forces beyond her comprehension? This question remains open, inviting you to ponder the delicate balance between agency and destiny in marriage and myth. In the quiet moments between the clashing armies and heroic speeches, you can almost hear Helen's silent lament, a soft echo of a woman caught in a story far larger than herself. Her regret is not loud or vengeful, but profound and lingering, a whispered sorrow that invites empathy rather than judgment. And as you listen, you realize that Helen's tale is a mirror reflecting the timeless complexities of marriage, the tension between love and duty, desire and possession, freedom and captivity. Her story warns you gently that beauty and marriage together can be a fragile and dangerous combination, one that demands resilience and often brings regret. So hold this image in your mind, Helen, standing amidst ruins, her beauty both a blessing and a curse, her heart heavy with a quiet, enduring sorrow. She's a testament to the truth that even the most celebrated marriages in myth are woven with threads of regret and loss. Threads you cannot unravel, but can only acknowledge as part of the human story. Penelope's story is a quiet testament to endurance, patience, and the hidden sorrow nestled within marriage. You might picture her as the faithful wife awaiting Odysseus's return for 20 long years, weaving and unweaving her tapestry by firelight. But beneath that image lies a profound solitude and complicated regret. Marriage, in her case, is not just about love, but survival, an emotional odyssey marked by uncertainty, longing, and subtle power struggles. You tread softly through the shadows of her daily life, sensing the loneliness that no hero's tale can erase. Penelope's steadfastness is legendary, but it carries a weight many overlook: the silent ache of years spent in waiting, questioning, and guarding a fragile hope that may never be fulfilled. Imagine the heavy silence of the Ithacan halls, where suitors lounge, feasting and pressuring her to choose a new husband, while Penelope weaves her clever ruse. This is not a woman merely preserving her marriage out of loyalty. She's a strategist navigating a dangerous game, balancing societal expectations with her own desires and fears. Historians still debate whether Penelope's fidelity is a symbol of idealized womanhood or a reflection of the very real anxieties women faced when their marriages were left in limbo. Her story invites you to ponder how marriage can trap a woman not only through presence, but also through prolonged absence. One quirky detail often missed is how the ancient Greeks admired Penelope not only for her loyalty, but also for her wit and intelligence, qualities that allowed her to survive the prolonged uncertainty of Odysseus's absence. Picture her mind working tirelessly as her hands weave the day's tale into the night's fabric, a metaphor for how women's labor and emotional resilience often go unseen. It's almost as if the loom itself becomes a symbol of her silent resistance and clever endurance. Yet, beneath her cleverness and patience lies a complex emotional landscape. The waiting is not just physical, but psychological, a slow erosion of certainty and security. Penelope must grapple with fear, loneliness, and the possibility that her marriage, once a promise of partnership and protection, has become a distant memory, or worse, a fragile illusion. You sense the deep vulnerability in her quiet moments, the private doubts that no suitor or subject can glimpse. This hidden grief is the heart of her narrative, a reminder that marriage's trials are often born in silence. Penelope's story also exposes the social pressures on women in her position. She's expected to remain faithful, to guard her husband's household, and to uphold honor, even as years stretch endlessly without news. The tension between personal desire and public expectation is palpable, a strain that wears at her spirit over time. You might feel the weight of these expectations pressing down, a burden that transforms love into duty, passion into perseverance. Historians argue about whether Penelope's story served to uphold traditional gender roles, or subtly critique them by highlighting the emotional costs women bore. Was she a paragon of virtue, or a figure trapped by societal demands? The ambiguity of her character invites you to explore the nuanced realities of marriage, especially in a time when women's agency was limited, but their endurance profound. Remember the earlier stories of Hera's bitterness and Medea's fury. Penelope's quiet strength offers a different response to marital hardship, one of resilience and strategic patience rather than wrath. Yet, her endurance is not without its own form of sorrow. The prolonged absence of Odysseus leaves a void filled with longing and uncertainty, a state that wears at the soul even as it demands steadfastness. Imagine the nights she spends gazing toward the horizon, listening to the seas whisper and hoping for a familiar sail. The physical isolation mirrors her emotional solitude, and the burden of hope becomes both a comfort and a source of pain. Her story captures the paradox of marriage in myth, the promise of reunion shadowed by the threat of permanent loss. There's also the tension created by the suitors, who embody the disruptive forces threatening her marriage and household. Their presence is a constant reminder that marriage, far from being a settled state, is vulnerable to outside pressures and internal decay. Penelope's resistance against them is a fight to preserve not only her relationship, but her identity and home. You might smile at the cleverness with which she delays her choice, But behind that wit is a profound desperation to maintain what little control she has left. Penelope's narrative also invites reflection on the nature of love and loyalty. Is her commitment fueled by romantic love, social duty, or a mixture of both? The myths leave this question open, suggesting that marriage can be complex and multifaceted, shaped by emotion as well as obligation. Her story feels deeply human because it refuses to simplify these tangled feelings into neat categories. As you let her tale settle, you realize that Penelope's marriage is not the triumphant reunion often highlighted, but a long, difficult journey marked by endurance, doubt, and hidden regret. Her patience is heroic, yes, but it also carries the weight of the unspoken sorrow and the constant tension between hope and despair. So, carry with you this image, Penelope, weaving and unweaving, a figure of quiet power and deep loneliness, caught in the liminal space between love's promise and its painful realities. Her story is a whisper in the night, a reminder that sometimes the greatest trials of marriage are not fought with swords, but with patience and silent strength. Clytemnestra's tale drapes itself in shadows of betrayal and dark revenge, where marriage is no sanctuary, but a site of violent power, plays, and fatal grudges. You find yourself stepping cautiously into her world, a queen whose story unsettles the usual mythic scripts about marriage and loyalty. Instead of steadfast love or patient endurance, Clytemnestra offers a raw, unflinching portrait of marital breakdown writ large. Her marriage to Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and commander of the Greek forces in the Trojan War, is tangled in layers of sacrifice, deceit, and vengeance. She is often remembered for murdering her husband upon his return, but beneath that brutal act lies a complex web of grief and anger that speaks to the devastating emotional costs women bore when marriage turned to betrayal. Imagine the bitter years Clytemnestra endured while Agamemnon was away fighting at Troy. In his absence, she governed the kingdom alone, holding a power she was rarely acknowledged for. Yet she was haunted by the sacrifices her husband demanded, including the horrific act of sacrificing their daughter, Iphigenia, to appease the gods and secure favorable winds for the fleet. That act tore open a wound in their marriage, a wound soaked in blood and betrayal. It's easy to dismiss Clytemnestra as a vengeful villainess, but her story urges you to see the woman behind the myth, a woman who lost a child to her husband's ambition and suffered the consequences in silence and rage. Historically, this narrative reflects ancient Greek anxieties about female power and marital fidelity. Scholars debate whether Clytemnestra's story was meant to caution against women wielding too much authority, or to critique the destructive demands placed on wives by patriarchal societies. Her murder of Agamemnon challenges traditional roles. She is both queen and avenger, maternal figure and ruthless ruler, blurring the lines between victim and perpetrator. The tension in her story lies in that ambiguity, forcing you to grapple with marriage's darker emotional realities. A lesser-known detail is that Clytemnestra was sometimes portrayed with a serpent in her hand, or at her feet, a symbol of cunning and deadly power. Visualize her standing in the dim corridors of the palace, the flicker of torchlight casting shifting shadows over her calculating gaze. A serpent coiled silently as a reminder that beneath her regal exterior lurked a dangerous resolve. This image underscores the myth's themes of hidden threats and the poisonous consequences of broken trust. Her murder of Agamemnon upon his homecoming is often read as the climax of marital betrayal, but the story's roots run deeper. Clytemnestra's actions can be understood as both personal vengeance and political maneuvering. She is avenging her daughter and asserting power in a world where women's voices were usually silenced. Yet, the act also fractures the kingdom and sets off a chain of further violence, suggesting that marital rupture can have consequences far beyond the personal. You might feel the weight of that violent moment as more than just a mythic spectacle. It embodies the profound emotional turmoil that festers when love is twisted by betrayal, grief, and power struggles. Clytemnestra's story exposes how marriage can become a battleground where unresolved trauma explodes into destructive acts, echoing across generations. The scholarly debate around Clytemnestra also extends to her portrayal in Greek tragedy, where playwrights like Aeschylus add layers of psychological depth to her character. Was she purely villainous, Or was her revenge a tragic but understandable response to unimaginable loss? This ambiguity invites you to reflect on how marriage myths encode complex truths about human emotion, justice, and the consequences of broken bonds. Remember Medea's furious vengeance and Penelope's patient endurance. Clytemnestra's narrative offers a stark contrast, where endurance gives way to confrontation and fury. Her story complicates the mythic landscape, showing marriage not just as a place of love or loyalty, but as a crucible for unresolved pain and fierce retribution. Imagine the palace halls echoing with the aftermath of her actions, the silence after the storm, the uneasy calm that follows violence. Clytemnestra stands not as a symbol of marital harmony, but as a testament to marriage's capacity to harbor deep wounds and dangerous resentments. Her tale warns you that when grief and rage are suppressed, they may return with a deadly force. There's also the haunting presence of the sacrificed Iphigenia, whose death is the dark pivot around which the entire story turns. Her sacrifice is the cruel price of Agamemnon's ambition and the silent seed of Clytemnestra's wrath. You might feel the tragic weight of that loss as a metaphor for the hidden costs women often pay in marriages shaped by power and politics. And as you dwell in this story's shadows, you recognize that Clytemnestra's marriage was never a simple union of hearts, but a volatile intersection of personal pain and political necessity. Her revenge is both a personal catharsis and a dramatic indictment of the sacrifices demanded by marriage and war. So carry this image with you, Clytemnestra, queen and avenger, serpent in hand, standing amid the ruins of love and loyalty, a figure both terrifying and tragic. Her story lingers like a dark whisper, reminding you that the myths are not merely tales of heroism, but complex explorations of the human heart's capacity for both love and destruction. The sirens, those haunting creatures of myth, are often remembered only for their irresistible songs, and the doomed sailors drawn to their rocky shores. But their story holds a quiet, aching loneliness that few notice. You might picture them perched on jagged cliffs, voices weaving melodies that lure men to their deaths. But beneath that terrifying allure is a profound regret, a sorrow born from isolation and loss. These women are caught between worlds neither fully human nor divine, trapped in a fate that binds their power to destruction and their existence to endless solitude. Their marriage, if it can even be called that, is to the sea and to their own immortal grief, a binding far more painful than any earthly union. As you listen to their silent lament, you begin to see that the sirens embody a different kind of marital regret, the sorrow of being desired, yet forever apart. Imagine the sirens' lives as eternal guardians of a cruel boundary, their song both gift and curse. They wield a power so intoxicating that it spells doom for those who hear it, yet they themselves remain untouched by love or companionship. The isolation is palpable, surrounded by the vastness of the ocean and the inevitability of their own fates. The sirens' existence is marked by a yearning for connection they cannot have. Their story whispers a paradox, their voice draws others close, but no one can truly reach them. They are eternally married to their solitude, bound by the chains of their own enchanting song. Scholars debate whether the sirens symbolize the dangers of temptation and the peril of desire, or whether their myth encodes a deeper truth about female power and exclusion in ancient society. Were they feared because they represented women's sexual agency, or because they embodied the tragic consequences of isolation imposed by patriarchal norms? This ambiguity invites you to listen closely to their song, not just as a warning, but as an expression of sorrow and longing. A quirky and lesser-known detail is that some ancient sources describe the sirens as once being mortal women, musicians and poets who were transformed into these half-bird, half-woman creatures as punishment or as a way to immortalize their talents. Imagine the tragic twist of fate, gifted artists condemned to sing forever on desolate rocks, their creativity forever tied to death rather than life. It's as if the myths caution that brilliance and beauty can become prisons, binding women in roles of spectacle and danger. Their marriage to the sea is a powerful metaphor for women's relationships with forces beyond their control: nature, fate, and societal expectations that shape their identities and destinies. The sirens do not choose their isolation. It is imposed upon them, a fate they cannot escape. This mirrors many women's experiences in mythic marriages, where agency is limited and survival depends on navigating perilous circumstances. You might feel the haunting sadness as you imagine the sirens watching countless ships pass, their voices filled with longing, but their hearts untouched. They are both seductresses and prisoners, symbols of a tragic duality, power and helplessness intertwined. Their song is not just a lure, but a cry for connection, an eternal echo of loneliness that resonates through the myths. Historians and literary critics often interpret the sirens as warnings about the dangers of feminine allure and the consequences of unchecked desire. Yet their story also evokes sympathy, a recognition of the pain that accompanies their seductive role. It's a reminder that power, when isolated or misunderstood, can become a source of sorrow rather than joy. The siren's narrative contrasts with others you've heard tonight. Unlike Penelope's patient endurance or Medea's fiery vengeance, their story is one of resigned sorrow and enforced separation. They possess a terrifying allure, yet their greatest power is also their greatest curse. This nuanced portrayal complicates the mythic landscape, offering a glimpse into the multifaceted experiences of women's roles and regrets in marriage and beyond. Imagine their voices rising and falling with the tides, a melody that is at once beautiful and heartbreaking. You might sense the weight of their eternal weight, a fate to sing alone, forever echoing their unfulfilled desires. Their story invites you to consider the costs of power and isolation, the price women pay when their identities are bound to roles that deny true companionship. Their fate also connects to broader themes of transformation and punishment in mythology. The sirens were once something else, and their current state is a form of exile, a metamorphosis that carries both gifts and curses. This tension between past and present, freedom and captivity, adds depth to their narrative, making them figures of tragic beauty and eternal yearning. And as you listen to their haunting song in the quiet of your mind, you might feel a strange kinship with these mythic women, those who possess extraordinary gifts yet suffer profound loneliness. Their story is a subtle reminder that marriage, or any binding relationship, can sometimes mirror the siren's plight and enchanting trap, where power and pain coexist in delicate, painful balance. So hold this image close, the sirens perched on rocky shores, voices weaving a spell that no sailor can resist, hearts heavy with unspoken regret. They remind you that not all marital bonds are forged with human hands. Some are woven by fate, isolation, and the aching desire for connection that remains just out of reach. Psyche's journey is a delicate, winding path through love's trials, and the fragile trust that marriage demands a story, whispered softly beneath the thunderous epics of gods and heroes. You step beside her as she navigates a labyrinth, not just of enchanted forests and divine challenges, but of vulnerability and doubt that many overlook. Marriage, in Psyche's world, is less a fairy tale ending and more an ongoing test of faith, patience, and the willingness to see beyond appearances. You feel the tender tension in her story, the constant struggle between yearning for love and the fear of losing it. Her tale reveals marriage as a fragile dance, where trust must be earned anew each day, and where the slightest misstep can shatter hope. Imagine Psyche's first meeting with Eros, the god of love, a moment veiled in mystery and magic. Their union begins not with openness, but secrecy. A hidden marriage where Psyche must trust without seeing, love without knowing. This veiled relationship becomes a metaphor for the uncertainty inherent in marriage, the fear of the unknown, the anxiety that love might slip away if fully revealed. Scholars still debate whether Psyche's trials represent internal psychological struggles, rites of passage, or broader social commentaries on the nature of marriage and womanhood. Her story invites you to ponder how trust in marriage is both precious and precarious. A quirky and tender detail is Psyche's repeated tasks, each a near impossible challenge imposed by Aphrodite, Eros' mother, who disapproves of their union. These tasks, sorting mixed grains, fetching water from a deadly river, descending into the underworld, are not only physical, but symbolic tests of Psyche's resolve and faith. You might picture her hands trembling as she sorts the grains, each one a metaphor for the painstaking patience required to maintain love and trust in marriage. Her story is a gentle reminder that marriage demands endurance beyond mere affection. What stands out in Psyche's narrative is the theme of transformation through trials. Each challenge pushes her to grow, to understand herself and her love more deeply. Marriage, here, is not a static state, but an evolving journey, where love must be nurtured through perseverance and vulnerability. You sense the quiet courage beneath Psyche's fears, the bravery it takes to face uncertainty, and to keep believing in love's promise despite setbacks. Her story also explores the tension between divine and mortal realms, illustrating how marriage can bridge worlds yet expose deep differences and challenges. Eros and Psyche's relationship reflects the union of passion and soul, desire and intellect, chaos and order. This complexity makes their marriage a rich allegory for the intricate dynamics that real couples face, where love is never simple or assured. Historians and literary analysts often interpret Psyche's myth as an early psychological allegory, symbolizing the soul's journey toward wholeness through love's trials. Her name itself means soul or breath, emphasizing the deep spiritual dimensions of her marriage. This perspective invites you to see marriage not just as a social institution, but as a profound personal transformation, where trust and love evolve through hardship and discovery. You might smile softly at the irony that Psyche must endure these near-impossible tasks to win her place beside Eros, a reflection, perhaps, of the invisible labors many women undertake to sustain marriage. Her story honors the strength found in vulnerability and the quiet victories achieved through patience and faith. Recall earlier tales of Medea's fiery vengeance and Penelope's steadfast waiting. Psyche's journey offers a different but equally powerful response to marital challenges. Instead of rage or endurance alone, her story weaves together trust, trial, and eventual reconciliation, showing that marriage can be a transformative process of growth and healing. Imagine the moment Psyche finally opens the forbidden box from the underworld, only to succumb to despair and faint, an image of how fragile hope can be when trust is broken or tested too harshly. Yet, her recovery and reunion with Eros signal that love, when tempered by understanding and forgiveness, can endure even the darkest trials. Her narrative also reminds you that fear and doubt are natural companions in marriage, and that overcoming these is part of the shared journey. Trust, like love, must be cultivated carefully, and missteps, though painful, need not end the union. As you let Psyche's story settle, you see marriage as a delicate balance between secrecy and openness, fear and faith, loss and hope. Her tale whispers to you that marriage is less a destination and more a continuous path, demanding courage to face the unknown and grace to forgive imperfection. So hold this gentle image close, Psyche, the soul in motion, navigating love's labyrinth with trembling hands and an unwavering heart. Her story is a soft hymn to the power of trust and the enduring hope that marriage, though fraught with trials, can lead to profound transformation. Thetis's reluctant marriage to Peleus is a tale drenched in divine reluctance and mortal insistence, where the bonds of union are tangled with sorrow and inevitability. You might picture Thetis as a shimmering sea goddess, graceful and aloof, yet her story reveals a profound tension between desire and duty that resonates through the myths. Her marriage is not born of passion but of fate and prophecy, a union she resists because she knows the price it will exact. As you move through her narrative, you sense the quiet grief that underlies this divine marriage, a sorrow not often spoken but deeply felt. Thetis is bound not by love, but by the inexorable will of the gods and the cruel threads of destiny, making her marriage a symbol of resignation and loss. Imagine Thetis gliding through ocean waves, a figure of ethereal beauty and power, yet burdened by knowledge of the future. Prophecies foretold that any son she bore would surpass his father in greatness, making her wary of union with a mortal. Yet Peleus, a mortal hero, persists, capturing her with a mix of courage and desperation. Their wedding, a rare blending of divine and human realms, is marked by both celebration and shadow, an event that sets into motion the fateful events leading to the Trojan War. You feel the weight of Thetis's sacrifice, trading her freedom and solitude for a marriage that neither she nor Peleus fully controls. Scholars still debate the meaning behind Thetis's marriage, whether it represents the inevitable compromises forced upon women, even divine ones, or a symbolic union reflecting the complex relationships between mortals and gods. Some argue that Thetis embodies the tension between individual will and cosmic destiny. Her reluctant marriage, a metaphor for the constraints placed on women by fate and society. This ambiguity invites you to reflect on how marriage can be both a personal and universal ordeal, shaped by forces beyond individual control. A curious fringe detail is that Thetis was reputed to have the power of shapeshifting, able to transform into fire, water, and animals to evade capture. Picture her slipping through Peleus's grasp in countless forms, a dance of resistance and surrender. This imagery captures the paradox of her marriage, a goddess who cannot fully submit, yet who is bound by fate to a mortal husband. It's as if the myths recognize the conflict within marriage between freedom and commitment, independence and union. Thetis' story also explores themes of maternal sacrifice and the burdens carried by women in marriage. She bears Achilles, a son destined for greatness and tragedy, and her attempts to protect him reflect the deep maternal anguish intertwined with marital bonds. You might sense her pain as she tries to shield Achilles from his doomed fate, knowing that her role as wife and mother binds her to a tragic destiny. Her marriage, then, is not just a personal union, but a crucible where love and loss are inseparable. Remember the earlier stories of Hera's bitter crown and Medea's fiery vengeance. Thetis' reluctant marriage adds another shade to the complex spectrum of marital regret in mythology. Hers is not a story of anger or defiance, but of quiet resignation and the painful acceptance of destiny's demands. This narrative reminds you that not all marital regrets erupt in dramatic acts. Some are born silently beneath the surface, shaping lives in subtle but profound ways. Imagine the waves crashing against rocky shores, Thetis' home and prison, a metaphor for the turbulent emotions swirling beneath her composed exterior. Her transformation abilities symbolize the fluidity and instability of marriage itself, a union that requires adaptation and sometimes surrender. You might feel the ebb and flow of her emotions, the push and pull between desire for freedom and the obligations imposed by love and fate. Historians and mythologists often interpret Thetis' story as reflecting ancient Greek views on the limits of female power and the inevitability of marriage as a social contract. Even for goddesses, her reluctance speaks to the tensions women face between personal agency and societal expectation, a theme that echoes through many myths. This perspective invites you to consider marriage as a complex negotiation, where individual desires are often subsumed by external pressures. There's also the poignant irony that Thetis' marriage, meant to unite divine and mortal realms, ultimately leads to the catastrophic Trojan War, underscoring the unintended consequences of such unions. Her sorrow is both personal and cosmic, a reminder that marriage can be a nexus of love and destruction, hope and despair. As you let Thetis' story settle, you recognize marriage as a delicate balance of power, sacrifice, and fate, a theme that resonates beyond myth into the human experience. Her reluctant bond with Peleus invites you to reflect on how love and obligation intertwine, shaping destinies in ways both beautiful and tragic. So hold this image softly, Thetis, the shape-shifting sea goddess, caught between freedom and marriage, her heart heavy with unspoken sorrow. Her story is a gentle whisper that marriage, even among gods, is fraught with complexity, regret, and the enduring struggle between self and union. Andromache's story is a haunting portrait of marriage shattered by war and loss, where love's fragile promise is violently torn apart by the cruel tides of fate. You step into her world as the devoted wife of Hector, Prince of Troy, a woman whose life is defined by loyalty and sacrifice, yet overshadowed by the impending doom that war casts over every hearth. Her marriage is a tender refuge amidst chaos, but it cannot shield her from the devastating consequences of conflict and power struggles. As you move through her narrative, you feel the quiet strength and profound grief that define her existence, a woman forced to endure not only the loss of her husband, but the dismantling of her family and identity. In Andromache's story, marriage becomes a poignant symbol of vulnerability and survival. Imagine the early days of their union, scenes of gentle affection between Hector and Andromache, moments of brief respite before the storm. Her love for him is steadfast, rooted in both passion and duty, embodying the ideal of marital devotion celebrated in myth. Yet, you sense the undercurrent of tension, the knowledge that Hector's role as warrior places their happiness in constant jeopardy. Her story reveals how marriage in these myths is intertwined with fate and societal roles, where personal love is inseparable from public responsibility and danger. Historians still debate how much Andromache's experience reflects the realities of women in wartime ancient Greece. Was she a typical wife, mourning a husband lost to the battlefield? Or a mythic archetype representing the resilience of women amidst destruction? This ambiguity invites you to consider the broader social implications of marriage during times of conflict, where women often bore the silent burdens of loss and displacement. A lesser-known detail is that, after Troy's fall, Andromache was taken as a concubine by Neoptolemus, Achilles' son, further compounding her grief and illustrating the harsh fates that awaited many women in mythic wars. Imagine her torn between mourning her lost husband and navigating the precariousness of her new life, a testament to the resilience demanded by circumstances beyond her control. This transition reveals how marriage and power dynamics shifted dramatically in times of war, often leaving women vulnerable to new forms of suffering. Andromache's narrative exposes the intersection of marriage, motherhood, and survival. Her role as mother to Astyanax, Hector's son, carries immense significance. Yet, even this bond is threatened by the brutal realities of war. The eventual fate of her child, tragically cast down from Troy's walls, underscores the merciless consequences of political upheaval on familial ties. Her story is a stark reminder that marriage in myth is not only about union, but also about the fragility of legacy and lineage. You might recall Medea's fiery vengeance and Penelope's patient waiting. Andromache's experience adds a somber shade to the spectrum of marital responses in myth. Her story is less about active resistance or clever endurance, and more about enduring loss with quiet dignity, a survival forged in the ashes of devastation. It reveals how marriage's promises can be cruelly broken by forces beyond personal control. The emotional depth of Andromache's character shines in moments of solitude and remembrance, where the grandeur of heroic tales fades into intimate sorrow. You feel the ache of her loss, the loneliness of a wife left behind, and the strength required to face an uncertain future. Her narrative invites empathy, urging you to see beyond the glory of war to the human cost borne by those who loved and lost. Historians and literary critics often highlight Andromache as an exemplar of the tragic consequences of war on women, emphasizing how marriage served as both a source of identity and vulnerability. Her story encapsulates the tension between personal affection and public catastrophe, a theme resonant in many ancient narratives. Imagine the silent nights in a foreign land, Andromache mourning Hector and the life they might have had, her heart heavy with memories and fears. This image of a displaced wife evokes universal feelings of loss and resilience, connecting the ancient myth to timeless human experiences. Her story also reflects on the nature of power and control within marriage and society. After Troy's fall, Andromache's fate is determined by conquerors, illustrating how women's lives were often shaped by the outcomes of male conflicts. This dynamic adds a layer of tragedy to her marriage, portraying it as vulnerable to the whims of history. Andromache's narrative ultimately speaks to the endurance of love and memory amid destruction. Her loyalty to Hector and her role as mother preserve a lineage and identity, even as the physical world around her crumbles. It's a testament to the strength found in connection and the human capacity to endure profound loss. So hold this image gently, Andromache, standing amidst ruins, a figure of steadfast love and quiet sorrow, embodying the resilience of women whose marriages were torn apart by forces beyond their control. Her story is a soft, enduring whisper of the costs of war and the fragility of human bonds. Ariadne's story is a bittersweet tale of love, abandonment, and the lingering pain that follows the unraveling of marriage and partnership. You step alongside her as she navigates the aftermath of betrayal, a woman once filled with hope and devotion, now cast into solitude by the very man she helped save. Her marriage, or what might have been, was not a union sealed with lasting joy, but a fleeting promise dissolved by desertion. In Ariadne's narrative, you witness the raw vulnerability of a woman left to grapple with the shattering of trust and the painful task of reclaiming identity beyond the shadow of her lover. Her story is a quiet meditation on how marriage can begin with promise, but end in profound regret. Imagine the moment Ariadne meets Theseus, the Athenian prince who arrives on Crete to confront the deadly Minotaur. She offers him her cunning and unspooling thread to guide him safely from the labyrinth, a gift born of love and hope for their future together. Her marriage is woven into that thread, a symbol of trust and partnership. Yet, after Theseus triumphs, the myth takes a darker turn. He abandons her on the island of Naxos, leaving her isolated and heartbroken. You feel the sting of that desertion, a betrayal as cruel as any wound, marking her story with a sorrow that reverberates through the ages. Scholars debate whether Ariadne's abandonment reflects ancient anxieties about women's dependence on men, or serves as a cautionary tale about the risks of misplaced trust in marriage. Was she a victim of fate, or did her story carry warnings about the fickle nature of love and power? This ambiguity invites you to explore the fragile foundations upon which many mythic marriages were built, and the emotional wreckage that followed when those foundations cracked. A lesser-known detail is that some versions of the myth suggest Dionysus, the god of wine and ecstasy, eventually finds and marries Ariadne, elevating her to divine status. Picture her transformation from forsaken mortal to immortal consort, a bittersweet redemption that offers hope amid heartbreak. Yet, even this divine marriage is tinged with complexity. Her union with Dionysus speaks to the possibility of healing, but also to the enduring scars left by betrayal. Ariadne's story explores themes of abandonment and renewal, showing that marriage can be a journey marked by loss as much as by union. Her experience reflects the vulnerability inherent in trusting another with your heart, and the resilience required to rebuild after that trust is broken. You sense the delicate balance between despair and hope, between mourning and the possibility of new beginnings. Recall earlier tales of Clytemnestra's dark revenge and Penelope's patient waiting. Ariadne's narrative adds another layer to the tapestry of marital regret. Hers is not a tale of wrath or endurance, but of sudden loss, and the challenge of finding oneself after being left behind. It's a quiet but powerful story of survival and transformation. Imagine Ariadne alone on the shore, the thread in her hand, a symbol of both salvation and abandonment, the waves whispering the cruel promise of escape that never came. This image lingers, a poignant reminder of how marriage's unraveling can leave deep emotional wounds that shape a woman's destiny. Her story also touches on the nature of agency and power in marriage. While she aids Theseus with intelligence and courage, her fate is ultimately determined by his choices, highlighting the limited control women often had over their lives and relationships. This dynamic adds a layer of tragedy to her narrative, emphasizing the precariousness of trust and love. Historians and mythologists often interpret Ariadne's abandonment as a reflection of ancient societal attitudes toward women's roles and the instability of marriages formed under heroic or political circumstances. Her story encapsulates the emotional cost of such unions and the enduring impact of betrayal. And as you let Ariadne's tale settle, you recognize the timelessness of her experience, the universal pain of love lost, and the struggle to reclaim hope. Her narrative whispers that, even in abandonment, there's a path to healing and transformation, though the journey is fraught with sorrow. So hold this delicate image softly, Ariadne, once a hopeful lover, now a solitary figure on the shore, clutching the thread that both saved and forsook her. Her story is a tender, enduring echo of the complexities of love, trust, and the painful realities of marriage's end. Persephone's tale unfolds as a poignant exploration of division and longing, a marriage that pulls her between two worlds and reveals the fractures within union itself. You step into the shadowed realm where Persephone exists, caught between the sunlit fields of her mother Demeter and the dark, silent underworld ruled by Hades. Her marriage is not a simple joining of two hearts, but a profound embodiment of separation, a forced alliance that divides her essence and binds her to a fate beyond choice. As you move through her story, you feel the tension of being both loved and imprisoned, nurtured and claimed, alive, yet partially lost. Persephone's marriage whispers a truth about the pull of conflicting worlds within marriage, the heart torn between freedom and obligation, light and shadow. Imagine the moment of her abduction, a sudden descent from innocence to a realm where time stands still and darkness reigns. The myth speaks softly of her surprise and fear, the abrupt severing from the life she knew, You sense the sorrow in Demeter's grief-stricken search, a mother's anguish mirrored in the desolation of the earth itself, as the seasons change in response to her daughter's absence. Persephone's story, at its core, is about loss and reunion, the cycles of separation and return that echo through nature and human experience alike. Scholars debate the origins and meanings of Persephone's myth, whether it is a symbolic explanation for the changing seasons, a ritual drama of death and rebirth, or a narrative reflecting ancient views on marriage and female autonomy. This ambiguity invites you to consider how marriage can simultaneously bind and divide, offering a complex metaphor for the interplay of independence and connection. A quirky and evocative detail is how the myth highlights the pomegranate seeds Persephone eats in the underworld, binding her irrevocably to that realm. Picture the vivid red seeds, sweet yet sealing, a symbol of love's ties that cannot be broken once tasted. This small but powerful element illustrates the tension in marriage between choice and consequence, where a single act can alter one's destiny forever. Persephone's dual existence embodies the paradox of marital roles, the bride who is also a queen, the beloved who is also captive. Her time divided between the surface and the underworld mirrors the shifting roles women navigate in marriage and life, balancing desires and duties, light and dark facets of identity. You might feel the pull of these opposing realms within her, a soul stretched between love and loss. The myth also reflects on themes of consent and power, as Persephone's abduction by Hades raises questions about agency and autonomy in marriage. Was her union a willing partnership or a forced alliance? This tension resonates with broader discussions about the nature of marriage in ancient times, especially regarding women's rights and freedoms. Remember earlier stories like Thetis's reluctant bond or Ariadne's abandonment? Persephone's narrative adds another dimension to the complex tapestry of marital regret and resilience. Her story is less about betrayal or endurance, and more about transformation and the negotiation of dual identities within marriage. Imagine the earth blooming in spring as Persephone returns to her mother's embrace, a cycle of hope and renewal, shadowed by the inevitable descent back into darkness. This rhythm reflects the cyclical nature of many marriages, the ebb and flow of closeness and distance, joy and sorrow. Historians and mythologists often view Persephone as a figure of profound psychological and spiritual symbolism, representing the soul's journey through suffering toward wholeness. Her marriage to Hades is not just a physical union, but a metaphor for confronting the hidden, shadowy parts of ourselves in relationship and life. Her story invites you to embrace the complexity of marriage, the coexistence of light and shadow, freedom and obligation, loss and renewal. It reminds you that love can be both a sanctuary and a prison, a source of life and a passage through darkness. So carry this image gently, Persephone, radiant and shadowed, moving between realms, her heart tethered to both earth and underworld. Her story is a whispered meditation on the enduring tensions and transformations woven into the fabric of marriage. Niobe's tale is a stark and sorrowful reflection on pride, loss, and the shattering consequences of broken familial bonds, where marriage becomes both a source of identity and a wellspring of devastating grief. You walk with her through a story marked by hubris and heartbreak, a woman once proud of her many children, whose confidence in her familial status leads to a tragic reckoning. Her marriage to Amphion, king of Thebes, was a symbol of prosperity and power, uniting two great houses and producing offspring that were the envy of the gods. Yet, it is precisely this pride that seals her fate, igniting divine wrath and setting into motion a chain of sorrow that leaves her bereft and broken. Niobe's story reveals how marriage and family, while sources of strength, can also become crucibles of suffering when arrogance blinds us to humility and compassion. Imagine Niobe standing tall, surrounded by her numerous children, her heart swelling with pride and perhaps a hint of vanity. Her boast of superiority over the goddess Leto, who bore only two children, Apollo and Artemis, marked the turning point in her myth. This act of hubris, daring to challenge divine honor, invites punishment, illustrating how pride can undermine the very foundations of marriage and family. You sense the tension between human arrogance and divine justice, a dynamic that reverberates through countless myths and cautions about the perils of excessive pride in one's familial role. Historians and scholars debate whether Niobe's story served as a moral lesson, emphasizing the virtues of humility within marriage and family, or as a reflection of social anxieties surrounding lineage and fertility. Her many children symbolize wealth and continuity, crucial aspects of marital success in ancient societies. Yet her downfall underscores the fragile balance between pride and reverence necessary to maintain those blessings. This duality invites you to reflect on how marriage and family ties can be both sources of joy and potential ruin. A haunting detail of the myth is the ruthless vengeance exacted by Apollo and Artemis, who slay all of Niobe's children in retribution. Imagine the silence that follows the massacre, the emptiness of a mother's grief, the desolation of a home stripped of laughter and life. This image of profound loss is one of the most poignant in mythology, illustrating the catastrophic consequences when familial bonds are severed violently. Niobe's sorrow becomes a symbol of maternal grief and the ultimate price of pride within the marital and familial context. Niobe's narrative also explores themes of transformation and endurance. Stricken by unbearable grief, she is turned to stone, her tears forming a perpetual stream, a river of mourning that flows eternally. You picture this petrified figure, a monument to sorrow and regret, reminding all who see her of the dangers of hubris and the fragility of human happiness. Her metamorphosis is a powerful metaphor for how the consequences of marital and familial pride can harden the heart and isolate the soul. Recall the earlier stories of Clytemnestra's vengeance and Andromache's loss. Niobe's tragedy adds a profound layer to the theme of marital and familial grief in myth. Unlike active revenge or stoic endurance, her tale is a testament to the overwhelming power of sorrow and the lasting impact of divine retribution. It reveals that marriage and family, while foundational, are vulnerable to forces both within and beyond human control. You might feel a somber weight as you imagine Niobe's stone form, tears flowing like an endless river, a silent witness to the destructive consequences of pride and the devastating costs of losing what marriage and family once promised. Her story urges a contemplation of the delicate balance between human ambition and humility necessary to sustain love and life. Historians often view Niobe as an archetype of maternal loss and tragic pride, embodying the tension between human frailty and divine authority. Her story serves as a cautionary tale about respecting limits and the sanctity of familial bonds, themes deeply woven into the fabric of marriage myths. Her narrative also resonates with psychological dimensions, illustrating how unresolved grief and guilt can petrify the human spirit, turning living hearts into statues of sorrow. This metaphor invites you to consider the emotional costs of marital and familial breakdowns, echoing across time and culture. As you let Niobe's story linger, you realize that marriage and family are not just social contracts but profound emotional landscapes, fraught with joy, pride, sorrow, and regret. Her myth whispers to you about the necessity of humility and the dangers of arrogance, offering timeless lessons wrapped in the sorrow of loss. So hold this image gently, Niobe, the grieving mother turned to stone, tears forever flowing, a silent monument to pride's fall and the fragility of human happiness. Her story is a solemn echo through the ages, reminding you that marriage and family, while sources of strength, require balance, respect, and compassion to endure. Beyond the famous wives of myth, there exists a quiet shadow realm of forgotten women, those whose stories have been whispered so softly or overshadowed that their regrets remain unseen, yet their experiences echo the universal pains of marriage. These lesser-known wives, consorts, and companions inhabit the margins of mythic narratives, bearing silent witness to the complex realities of marital life in a world shaped by gods, heroes, and destiny. You step into this subtle landscape, where the absence of grand tales does not diminish the weight of their sorrows. Instead, their stories weave a delicate but profound tapestry of regret, resilience, and quiet endurance that completes the picture of marriage in Greek mythology. Imagine the countless women who stood behind the scenes, wives of minor kings, daughters married off to secure alliances, or consorts whose names are lost to time. Their marriages were often transactions of power and politics, where personal happiness was a distant consideration. These women navigated roles defined by obedience and sacrifice, their hopes and regrets hidden beneath the public facades expected of them. As you trace their imagined footsteps, you sense the loneliness of lives devoted to duty rather than desire, the silent struggles behind the grandeur of myth. Scholars debate how much these forgotten figures represent historical realities versus narrative devices used to highlight the plights of more famous heroines. Were they mere shadows, or did their silent presence give voice to the countless women whose marital regrets were never recorded? This question invites you to consider how mythology both reveals and conceals the feminine experience, offering glimpses into lives shaped by unspoken sorrow. A quirky detail emerges in how some of these lesser-known wives appear briefly in texts as sources of prophecy, wisdom, or tragedy, hinting at deeper stories beneath their fleeting mentions. Imagine a nameless queen whose grief foretells disaster, or a silent mother whose lament shapes a hero's fate. These glimpses serve as reminders that, even in obscurity, women's marital experiences influence the mythic world in profound ways. Their stories also illuminate the recurring themes of loss, powerlessness, and endurance in marriage. These women often faced abandonment, betrayal, or subjugation without the dramatic flourishes granted to their more famous counterparts. Yet their silent endurance speaks volumes about the emotional realities of marriage, revealing how regret can be a quiet companion, lingering unnoticed but deeply felt. You might recall Penelope's patient waiting and Medea's fiery wrath. These forgotten wives show a different kind of response, one marked by resignation, subtle resistance, or the slow erosion of hope. Their narratives, though less visible, add depth and nuance to the mythic portrayal of women's experiences within marriage. Imagine the unrecorded sorrows of these women as a soft murmur beneath the clashing swords, and divine dramas, a collective echo of regret and longing that fills the spaces between the grand tales. Their presence suggests that marriage in myth was not solely the domain of heroes and goddesses, but also of countless women whose stories remain untold. Historians often highlight the importance of acknowledging these marginal figures to gain a fuller understanding of ancient attitudes toward marriage and womanhood. Their stories remind you that the mythic landscape is vast and complex, shaped by many voices, including those whispered in silence. These women's silent regrets challenge the notion that marriage was universally glorious or fulfilling in myth. Instead, they reveal marriage as a varied and often difficult experience, shaped by social expectations, political needs, and personal sacrifices. As you let their presence linger, you sense a profound truth. The weight of marital regret is not measured only by dramatic acts or epic tales, but also by the quiet endurance of those who carry their burdens unseen. Their stories invite compassion and reflection on the many facets of marriage. So hold this soft image close, the forgotten wives and consorts of myth, their voices a gentle chorus of silent sorrow and resilience, weaving an unseen thread through the tapestry of marriage stories. Their presence enriches the mythic narrative, reminding you that every marriage celebrated or concealed carries its own regrets and hopes. Fate weaves itself tightly into the fabric of marital tragedy, its threads inescapable and often cruel, binding women to destinies shaped long before their voices could be heard. You find yourself caught in this web where prophecy and inevitability overshadow love and choice, where marriage is less a matter of the heart and more an unfolding of predetermined designs. The stories you've encountered are threaded with this theme, women whose marriages are marked not just by personal feelings, but by the weight of cosmic forces that shape their lives and seal their regrets. As you step into this world, you sense the silent pressure of fate pressing down, a relentless force that shapes and sometimes shatters marriages before they can fully bloom. Imagine the countless prophecies whispered in the shadows, omens, oracles, and warnings that predict doom and despair, yet remain unavoidable. Marriage in myth often begins with a foretelling, a glimpse into a future that cannot be altered, binding women to paths laid out by gods or destiny. These predictions hover like dark clouds, coloring relationships with inevitable tragedy. You feel the tension of trying to forge love amid a storm of foreknowledge, the heartbreak of knowing that some unions are doomed from the start. Scholars debate how much these fatalistic narratives reflect ancient Greek beliefs about human agency versus divine control. Were these myths meant to teach acceptance of fate's supremacy, or did they subtly critique a world where individuals, especially women, had little say over their lives and marriages? This ongoing conversation invites you to grapple with the balance between destiny and free will, a tension that underpins much of human experience. A fascinating detail is how many myths incorporate rituals or attempts to avert fate, highlighting the human desire to resist or negotiate with destiny. Women in these stories often seek magical interventions, sacrifices, or clever schemes to escape foretold disasters. Picture a bride clutching charms or consulting seers, desperate to change the course of her doomed marriage. These acts of defiance add depth to the narrative, revealing the resilience and hope that persist even in the face of inevitable tragedy. The theme of fate's grip also underscores the social realities of ancient marriage, where decisions were often made to fulfill political alliances or divine mandates rather than personal affection. Women's lives were shaped by these external forces, and marriage became a stage where cosmic plans played out in human drama. You might sense the frustration and helplessness beneath these narratives, emotions that resonate across time. Recall the stories of Thetis's reluctant union and Niobe's prideful downfall, both intertwined with prophecy and destiny. Fate here is not a passive background, but an active participant, directing the course of marriage and amplifying its risks and regrets. It casts a shadow over love, turning personal relationships into echoes of divine will. Imagine the quiet moments before a wedding, heavy with the knowledge of an unchangeable future, or the silent despair of a wife who watches tragedy unfold, powerless to intervene. These images linger as somber reminders of fate's sovereignty and the fragile human hearts caught in its web. Historians and mythologists often interpret the prominence of fate in marital myths as reflective of broader cultural beliefs about destiny and the human condition. These narratives teach the necessity of accepting suffering and loss as integral to life, especially in the context of marriage. They also highlight the tension between desire for control and the acceptance of forces beyond reach. Women's roles in these fated marriages often underscore the limits placed on their agency, illustrating how social and divine structures conspire to constrain personal choice. Their regrets are magnified by the sense that they are actors in a drama written by others, their voices muted by the overwhelming power of destiny. As you let this theme settle, you realize that fate in marriage myths is both a source of despair and a framework for understanding human suffering. It invites contemplation of how much control we truly have over our relationships, and how acceptance can be both a surrender and a form of strength. So carry this image gently, a woman standing at the crossroads of destiny, her heart heavy with knowledge of an inevitable path, yet her spirit quietly defiant. Her story is a quiet testament to the enduring human struggle to find meaning and agency within the vast, unyielding designs of fate. The grip of patriarchy in Greek myths casts a long and oppressive shadow over the institution of marriage, shaping the narratives of women's lives with rigid expectations and limited freedoms. You walk through this world where male authority dictates not only the terms of marriage, but the very identity and worth of women, whose desires and voices are often muted or dismissed. Marriage, in this context, is less a mutual partnership and more a transfer of control. Women are passed from father to husband, their lives shaped by alliances and the maintenance of male power. As you step closer, you begin to see how this patriarchal framework fuels much of the regret and sorrow that permeates the stories, revealing marriage as a battleground for agency and autonomy in a male-dominated society. Imagine the constant pressure on women to conform to ideals of obedience, chastity, and subservience, roles carved out by societal expectations rather than personal choice. Their marriages are often arranged, strategic moves in the chess game of politics and inheritance, where love is a luxury few can afford. You feel the weight of these constraints bearing down on women like Andromache or Clytemnestra, whose fates are entangled with the ambitions and decisions of men. Their regrets are not merely personal, but rooted in systemic oppression, a reflection of the patriarchal order that governs their world. Scholars have long debated the extent to which Greek myths reinforce or critique these patriarchal norms. Some argue that the stories serve to uphold male dominance by portraying women as dangerous when they assert power or as pitiable when they resist. Others suggest that the myths reveal the tensions and contradictions within patriarchy, exposing the costs it imposes on both women and men. This ongoing discourse invites you to examine the complexities of gender dynamics and the struggles for autonomy embedded in marital narratives. Of revealing detail is how many myths depict women's power as inherently threatening, often linked to chaos or destruction when it challenges male authority. Figures like Medea and Clytemnestra embody this fear, their actions framed as dangerous rebellions against the social order. Imagine the wary eyes watching these women, the hushed warnings that circulate about the perils of female agency. This motif reflects patriarchal anxieties and the desire to control women's roles within marriage and society. Marriage itself is portrayed as a site where male lineage and property are secured, often at the expense of women's well-being. The transfer of women through marriage serves to reinforce family alliances and maintain patriarchal power structures. You sense the transactional nature of these unions, where women are valued more for their connections and offspring than for their individuality. Their regrets stem from being reduced to instruments of political and familial strategy, their personal desires subordinated to broader agendas. Recall the stories of Penelope's endurance and Helen's burden, both shaped by patriarchal expectations of fidelity, beauty, and obedience. Their narratives illustrate how women's identities in marriage were constructed to serve male interests, often leading to internal conflict and sorrow. These myths expose the limits imposed on women's freedom and the emotional toll of conforming to prescribed roles. Imagine the silent frustrations of women like Ariadne or Andromache, whose fates are dictated by men's choices, their voices overshadowed by male heroes and gods. Their stories invite empathy and reflection on the systemic inequalities that frame marriage as a form of control rather than companionship. Historians note that while Greek mythology often centers male heroes and their exploits, the stories of women reveal subtle critiques of patriarchy's harshness. Through tragedy, lamentation, and resistance, these narratives provide insight into the lived experiences of women navigating a society that prioritized male dominance. Their marital regrets become a form of quiet rebellion, a testament to the human cost of social systems that deny autonomy and reduce women to property or pawns. These myths challenge you to see beyond the surface of heroic tales and recognize the underlying struggles for agency and respect. As you let this theme resonate, you understand that patriarchy's grip on marriage myths is both a source of conflict and a catalyst for storytelling that reveals the complexities of gender and power. It invites you to listen to the silenced voices and honor the resilience of women who endured and resisted. So carry this image with you, a woman standing firm amid a storm of expectations, her spirit yearning for freedom within a world that seeks to contain her. Her story is a whisper against the roar of patriarchy, a subtle but powerful reminder of the enduring struggle for agency in marriage and life. The ongoing debate among historians about the relationship between myth and reality in ancient Greek marriage narratives invites you into a complex dialogue where truth and storytelling intertwine in a delicate dance. You find yourself pondering whether these myths merely reflect the harsh realities of ancient marital customs, or whether they were crafted to serve broader cultural, political, or moral purposes. The stories of women's regrets, sufferings, and struggles in marriage could be seen as mirrors held up to real lives, exposing the emotional and social challenges faced by women in patriarchal societies. Yet, at the same time, these myths often exaggerate or dramatize events to communicate lessons, warnings, or ideals, blurring the line between lived experience and artistic creation. As you navigate this tension, you begin to appreciate the layered functions these narratives served, both as reflections of society and as powerful mythic constructions that shaped cultural understandings of marriage and gender. Imagine the daily realities of ancient Greek women, whose marriages were often arranged for political alliances, economic stability, or social advancement, leaving little room for personal choice or romantic love. These historical conditions set the backdrop against which the myths arose, providing a kernel of truth within the often fantastical narratives. Women's experiences of limited agency, vulnerability to abandonment, or forced endurance resonate deeply with the stories you've encountered, such as Penelope's faithful waiting or Andromache's widowhood. Yet, the myths also amplify these themes, transforming individual struggles into epic tales of betrayal, revenge, or divine intervention. This blend of fact and fiction complicates your understanding of how marriage functioned both in history and imagination. Scholars continue to debate how much weight to give these myths as historical sources. Some argue that they offer valuable insights into gender roles, social norms, and marital expectations, serving as cultural documents that reveal the values and anxieties of ancient society. Others caution against reading them as literal accounts, emphasizing their symbolic, ritualistic, or didactic purposes. This scholarly tension invites you to approach the myths with both critical awareness and openness to their deeper meanings. A fascinating detail is that archaeological findings sometimes align with mythic themes such as evidence of bride prices, dowries, and social stratification in marriage practices, lending credence to the societal structures depicted in myths. Yet, the emotional and psychological dimensions of the stories, like Medea's vengeance or Niobe's grief, transcend historical facts, tapping into universal human experiences that resonate across time. This duality enriches your engagement with the myths, allowing you to see them as both cultural artifacts and enduring narratives of the human condition. The debate also extends to the role of myth in shaping societal norms versus reflecting them. Did these stories reinforce patriarchal values by portraying women's suffering as inevitable or deserved? Or did they provide a space for questioning and imagining alternative realities? You might consider how the complexity and diversity of women's portrayals, from obedient wives to vengeful heroines, suggest a dynamic discourse within myth itself, where multiple voices and perspectives coexist. Recall the earlier discussions of patriarchy's grip and the inescapable fate woven into these narratives. The scholarly debates illuminate how myths functioned as living stories, evolving with cultural shifts and reflecting the tensions and contradictions of marriage in ancient Greece. This understanding deepens your appreciation of the myths as rich, multifaceted texts that engage with social realities while transcending them through symbolic storytelling. Imagine the myths as mirrors cracked and refracted through time, each reflection offering a different facet of marriage, its joys, sorrows, constraints, and possibilities. You sense that the women's regrets encoded in these stories are both particular to their historical moment and timeless in their emotional truth, speaking to the ongoing human struggle with love, power, and autonomy. Historians' debates also highlight the importance of context, recognizing that myths were told and retold in varying regions and periods, each adding layers of meaning and adaptation. This fluidity suggests that marriage myths were not static prescriptions, but dynamic narratives that engaged audiences in ongoing conversations about gender, authority, and relational complexity. As you let these debates settle, you recognize that the myth's power lies in their ambiguity and openness, inviting reflection rather than offering clear answers. They encourage you to hold contradictions in tension, to see marriage as both a social institution and a deeply personal experience shaped by forces seen and unseen. So carry this image gently, the ancient storyteller weaving tales by firelight, inviting listeners into worlds where fact and fantasy merge, where women's voices echo in grief and strength, and where the mysteries of marriage unfold in all their complexity. Their stories remain alive, inviting you to listen, question, and understand the enduring human saga of love and loss. Why do these regrets endure? You feel their quiet pulse beneath the grand tales, the subtle, persistent thrum that refuses to fade as the myths echo through centuries. These stories of marriage woven with betrayal, endurance, loss, and transformation hold a timeless resonance that speaks to the deepest human experiences. You realize that the regrets of these mythic women are not merely relics of a distant past, but reflections of universal truths about love, power, and vulnerability. Their sorrow is a whispered reminder that marriage, no matter the era or culture, is a complex journey fraught with hope and heartache, freedom and confinement. As you absorb this, you sense the enduring power of these narratives to connect us across time, inviting empathy and understanding. Imagine the countless listeners across generations who have found in these myths a mirror for their own struggles, women and men grappling with the contradictions of love and commitment. The regrets you've heard tonight are not isolated tales, but part of a larger human conversation about the costs and blessings of union. These stories endure because they capture the raw edges of experience, the pain of broken trust, the weight of waiting, the clash between desire and duty that remain relevant no matter how much the world changes. You feel this continuity as a thread linking past and present, reminding you that marriage is always more than a social contract. It is a profound human condition. Scholars continue to explore why these regrets persist, suggesting that mythic narratives endure because they speak to the emotional truths beneath cultural variations, the archetypes embodied by Hera's bitterness, Medea's fury, Penelope's patience, and Persephone's divided self resonate because they reflect fundamental aspects of human psychology and relationships. This perspective invites you to see these myths not just as stories of a specific culture, but as universal explorations of the human heart in relation to love and loss. A poignant detail is how these regrets often exist in tension with moments of hope and renewal within the myths. For example, despite abandonment or betrayal, some women find new strength or unexpected forms of love, illustrating the resilience inherent in the human spirit. Picture Ariadne's eventual union with Dionysus, or Psyche's trials leading to eternal love narratives that soften sorrow, with the possibility of transformation. This interplay of despair and hope enriches the myths, making their messages both challenging and comforting. The endurance of these regrets also speaks to the nature of storytelling itself, how myths serve as vessels for collective memory and emotional processing. They allow listeners to confront difficult feelings, explore social norms, and imagine alternatives within a shared cultural framework. You sense that the persistence of these stories is a testament to their power to help us navigate the complexities of marriage, identity, and belonging. Reflect on the recurring motifs you've encountered: the looming presence of fate, the constraints of patriarchy, the fragile dance of trust and betrayal, all woven into narratives that speak to the heart's vulnerability. These elements create a rich tapestry that continues to inspire reflection and dialogue, keeping the regrets alive and meaningful. Imagine the quiet space after the final tale, the stillness filled with the weight of these shared human experiences. The regrets you've heard do not merely close a chapter, but open a space for empathy, learning, and perhaps healing. They remind you that while marriage can be a source of profound joy, it also demands courage to face its inherent challenges and sorrows. Historians and psychologists alike acknowledge that these mythic regrets persist because they resonate with the emotional realities of relationships, the joy intertwined with pain, the promise shadowed by loss. Their timelessness lies in their honesty and their refusal to simplify the complexities of love and marriage. As you let this final reflection settle, you feel a gentle reassurance that these stories, though ancient, speak to enduring aspects of the human condition. They invite you to hold both light and shadow, joy and regret, within the understanding of marriage and life itself. So carry this image softly, the myths, as a river flowing through time, carrying the voices of women whose marriages were marked by love, loss, and longing. Their regrets are not endings, but ongoing whispers, inviting you to listen deeply and carry their lessons into your own journey. Now, as you settle into the quiet of your space, let the weight of these stories gently lift. The myths we've shared tonight are not just tales from a distant past, but echoes of your own experiences and emotions. The regrets and sorrows of these women remind us that marriage is a complex dance of hope, endurance, and sometimes heartbreak. Yet within these stories lies a quiet strength, the resilience of the human spirit to love, to suffer, and to continue. Let their whispers fade softly into the night, leaving you with a sense of connection and understanding across time. Breathe deeply, allowing the stillness to cradle you, knowing that you are not alone in the tangled emotions marriage can bring. Rest now, with the gentle assurance that love's complexities are shared and remembered. May your dreams carry you through the shadows into a dawn of peace.